Ethan Carter was 38 years old, and for most of those years he had learned to disappear quietly into a room. At Sterling Dynamics, he managed mid-level projects with the kind of steady competence that nobody noticed until something went wrong. He didn't chase praise. He didn't flatter the people above him. When a junior employee made a mistake, Ethan took the blame before anyone else could open their mouth, and he never once mentioned it afterward. That was simply who he was, and after 15 years in the same building, most people had stopped questioning it. He had been divorced for years by then. The marriage had ended quietly, without a scene, the way some things end when two people simply stop reaching for each other. Since then, he had built a small, careful life around routine. Work in the morning, a quiet apartment at night. Nothing that asked too much of him, and nothing that could disappoint him either. Dating had not been part of the plan for a long time, and Ethan had grown used to being the reliable, unremarkable man in the office who never talked about his weekends. Lisa Bennett, who worked 2 desks away and was the only person in the building, who could talk to him without making him tense, had other ideas. For months, she had been trying to set him up with her younger sister, and for months Ethan had said no, in every polite way he could think to say it. "She's smart," Lisa told him one Friday afternoon, leaning against the wall of his cubicle with a coffee she'd clearly already finished twice. "She's funny. She works in publishing. And frankly, Ethan, she's tired of hearing about you from me instead of meeting you herself. I'm not exactly a mystery. I'm right here. You're right here, and you haven't been on a date in 3 years. I've been busy." "You've been hiding," Lisa said, not unkindly. "There's a difference." He didn't answer that, because there wasn't a good answer, and Lisa knew it too. She let the silence sit for a moment before pushing the last of it forward. "The way she always did. One dinner," she said. "If it's terrible, I'll never bring it up again." "I promise." Ethan sighed, the particular sigh of a man who already knows he's about to lose an argument he hadn't meant to start. Fine. One dinner. There was a version of his life, years ago, that had looked entirely different. A house with a yard. A marriage he had assumed, without ever really examining it, would simply continue the way it started. When that version of his life ended, it ended the way a lot of quiet marriages end. Not with shouting, but with two people slowly running out of reasons to keep trying. Until one morning neither of them bothered pretending otherwise anymore. Ethan had rebuilt himself since then, piece by careful piece. And the man who walked into that office every morning now was steadier for it, if a little more guarded than he used to be. That was how, on a Tuesday evening in early spring, Ethan Carter found himself standing outside a restaurant he had never set foot in, wearing a jacket he rarely wore, feeling the way a man feels walking into a job interview he hasn't studied for. He straightened his collar once, checked his phone for the reservation name Lisa had texted him, and walked inside. A hostess, in a black dress, led him past low lighting and the hum of quiet conversation toward a table near the window. He thanked her, took a breath, and let his eyes travel up to the woman already seated there, waiting. For a moment, his brain simply refused to process what his eyes were telling him. Victoria Sterling, his CEO, the woman who, 3 weeks earlier, had sat across a boardroom table and told him, without blinking, that he was too emotional to lead a team through a difficult quarter. The woman whose last name was carved into the lobby wall downstairs, sitting there in a dark green dress, a glass of wine untouched in front of her, clearly waiting for a blind date that was, impossibly, him. Neither of them moved. The restaurant noise seemed to fall away into something distant and unimportant. "You," Ethan said, before he could stop himself. "You," Victoria said back, and it wasn't a question so much as an accusation. A waiter approached, cheerful and oblivious, and asked if they would like to start with sparkling water or the wine list. Nobody answered him. He hovered for a second, sensed something was wrong, and quietly retreated toward the kitchen. Victoria set her glass down very slowly, the way people move when they are buying themselves time to think of something to say. When her voice finally came, it was flat, careful, laced with disbelief. "Is this?" she asked. Your idea of a blind date, Mr. Carter? Before Ethan could think of a single reasonable answer, a familiar voice called out from behind him, breathless and cheerful, entirely unaware that the evening had already fallen apart. Ethan, hi, sorry, traffic was a nightmare. Lisa stopped mid-sentence when she reached the table and saw the two faces staring back at her. Her smile flickered, then dropped entirely. Oh no, Lisa, Victoria said, in the tone of a woman addressing a much younger sibling who had clearly done something reckless. You're early. I'm your sister, Victoria added, before Lisa could speak. Not a stranger you invited off the street. Of course I'm early. Ethan looked between the two women, and something slid slowly into place behind his eyes. Sister, half-sister, Lisa admitted, wincing. Different fathers, different last names. It never really comes up at work. I didn't think it mattered. It didn't come up, Ethan repeated carefully. That the woman you were setting me up with runs the company we both work for? In my defense, Lisa said, holding up both hands. I had absolutely no idea you two had ever met. We've met, Victoria said dryly, not looking away from Ethan. In a boardroom. 3 weeks ago. He called my leadership style, and I quote, unnecessarily harsh. I said direct, Ethan corrected. You added the rest. Lisa glanced between them, recognized a situation she had no power to fix, and did the only sensible thing available to her. I am going to go check on our reservation, she announced, already backing away. I'll let you two catch up. She was gone before either of them could stop her, disappearing toward the hostess stand with the speed of a woman who valued her own survival above almost everything else. For a long moment, Ethan and Victoria sat in a silence that had real weight to it, the kind that presses down on a table and makes the silverware feel too loud. Then Victoria picked up the menu, opened it without looking at him, and said, well, we're already here. We are. I'm not going to waste a reservation over an awkward coincidence. That's very practical of you. I'm told that's my defining trait. She glanced up at him over the top of the menu. Along with being, and I quote, unnecessarily harsh. I never said unnecessarily. You implied it heavily. I implied direct. You've been adding adjectives to it for 3 weeks now. That earned him the first real smile of the evening, small and reluctant, the kind that seemed to surprise its own owner. She set the menu down. Fine. Since we're stuck with each other for the next hour, tell me something about yourself that isn't in your personnel file. That decision, it turned out, revealed a version of Victoria that nobody at the office had ever seen. Away from the boardroom, away from the glass walls of the executive floor, she was sharper in an entirely different way, quick with a dry joke, unimpressed by small talk, willing to laugh at her own expense when the piano player in the corner butchered a song neither of them could name. Ethan found himself relaxing despite every instinct telling him he shouldn't. They talked about nothing important, at first. About a client who once tried to pay an entire invoice in gift cards. About the restaurant's questionable choice of background music. About the strange particular loneliness of a corner office, which Victoria admitted to almost as a joke, and then seemed surprised she'd said out loud at all. You don't strike me as someone who admits to loneliness, Ethan said. I don't, usually. Maybe it's the wine. You've had 2 sips. 2 very honest sips, then. She asked him, eventually, why he'd never dated anyone from the office in 15 years. And he told her the truth, that it had never once seemed worth the risk of losing a job he was actually good at over a relationship that might not last the year. She nodded slowly, like the answer meant something to her beyond the words themselves. Twice, Ethan caught himself forgetting, for whole minutes at a time, exactly who she was to him on Monday mornings. Then her phone lit up on the table between them, and her whole posture changed in an instant. I need to take this, she said, already rising. Board emergency. Don't leave. She was gone before he could ask what kind of emergency required a call at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday night. Ethan sat alone at the table longer than felt comfortable. He wasn't trying to listen, but the restaurant had gone quiet in that lull between courses, and Victoria had only stepped a few feet away, near the coat check. and her voice, usually so controlled, so measured, was tight with something close to panic. "I understand the numbers, Richard. I don't need you to explain the numbers to me." A pause. "We are not losing that contract. I will fix this myself if I have to fly out there tonight." Another pause, longer this time, her jaw visibly tightening. "Do not bring this to a vote without me in the room." "I mean it." She hung up. She didn't come back to the table right away. Instead, she stood by the window for a moment, one hand pressed flat against the glass, and for those few seconds she looked like a completely different person than the woman who had just been laughing about gift cards. When Lisa slipped back to check on them a few minutes later, pretending to inspect a bottle of wine no one had ordered, Ethan asked quietly, "Is she all right?" Lisa glanced toward her sister, then lowered her voice. "The company's about to lose a contract worth hundreds of millions. There's a board member who's been looking for a reason to push her out for over a year now. This might be it. Why would anyone want to push her out? She's kept that company standing since their father died. That's exactly why," Lisa said. "After he died, she took over everything at once, and she never let anyone see her struggle with it. People mistake that for coldness. It isn't coldness, it's armor. She used to be different, you know, warmer, easier to read. She decided somewhere along the way that warmth was a weakness she couldn't afford to keep." Ethan didn't say anything right away. He was thinking about the woman in the boardroom who had told him he was too emotional to lead, and wondering now, for the first time, whether that sentence had ever really been about him at all. Lisa kept talking, quieter now. The way people talk when they're telling a story they don't often tell. Their father built this company from almost nothing. When he got sick, everyone assumed the board would bring in someone from outside to take over. Victoria was 31. She walked into that boardroom and told them she wasn't asking for the job. She was informing them she already had it. She buried her father on a Friday and was back at her desk by Monday morning. Nobody ever saw her cry. I don't think that was because she didn't. I think it was because she decided, somewhere in there, that crying wasn't a thing this building was going to be allowed to see. Victoria returned to the table a few minutes later. Her expression reassembled into something calm, though her eyes hadn't quite caught up yet. "Sorry," she said, sitting back down. "Where were we?" "You were about to apologize," Ethan said, "for calling me too emotional to lead." She almost smiled at that. "Almost. Don't push your luck, Carter." But then, quietly, in a voice that seemed to surprise even her, she added, "I'm sorry. About that meeting. I was harsher than I needed to be. And it wasn't fair to you." It was the first time, in 3 years of working under her, that Victoria Sterling had ever apologized to him for anything. The next morning, both of them arrived at the office and pretended, with impressive discipline, that the previous night had never happened. Victoria walked past Ethan's desk without a glance. The way she walked past every desk on that floor. Ethan didn't look up from his monitor. It should have worked. It didn't. A director from the finance floor had seen them leaving the restaurant together the night before, and by lunchtime the story had traveled the length of 3 departments, collecting details along the way that it had never actually possessed. By the time it reached the far side of the building, Ethan hadn't been on an accidental blind date at all. He had been maneuvering, cozying up to the CEO after hours, trying to buy himself a promotion through the easy door instead of earning it. He heard the whispers before anyone said a single word to his face, which was somehow worse. A colleague who used to eat lunch with him every day suddenly had somewhere else to be. Someone left a printed article about the dangers of office relationships on his desk. Unsigned, folded neatly in half, which was its own kind of message. Ethan had spent 15 years building a reputation as the one man in that building who never played games, who never used a shortcut when the long way was the honest one. Watching that reputation start to unravel over a misunderstanding, in less than a single day, made something in his chest go tight and cold in a way he hadn't felt since his divorce. He kept his head down. He worked later than usual, and left earlier than the gossip did, avoiding the break room entirely. Eating lunch alone at his desk with the door closed. He told himself, over and over, that it would pass on its own. One afternoon, a junior manager named Carl stopped by his desk, under the pretense of asking about a spreadsheet. Then let the real question slip in sideways. "So, is it true? You and the boss?" "There's nothing true about it, Carl. That's not really what people are saying." "People are wrong," Ethan said, and went back to his screen, and Carl left without another word, though the look on his face made clear he didn't quite believe it. It was a small exchange, barely a minute long, but it stayed with Ethan the rest of the day. A reminder that 15 years of quiet reliability could apparently be undone by a single unlucky reservation. Then, late Thursday evening, an email arrived in his inbox with a subject line that made his stomach drop before he'd even opened it. Confidential Project Aries. It was from Victoria. She wanted him on a new initiative. Personally. Reporting directly to her, outside the usual chain of command, effective immediately. Ethan read the message 3 times before he let himself believe it meant what it appeared to mean. Either she hadn't heard the rumors circulating 2 floors below her office, or she had heard every one of them and decided, deliberately, not to care. Either way, the timing could not have been worse for his reputation, and he knew it. He typed a reply, deleted it, typed another, deleted that one too. In the end, all he wrote back was 3 words. "I'll be there." Project Aries turned out to be exactly what its name suggested. A war room, assembled fast and staffed thin. Victoria needed someone who could rebuild the collapsing contract from the inside out. Someone who understood the technical details well enough to find exactly where the deal had first gone wrong, and who wouldn't panic when the numbers looked completely unrecoverable. She needed Ethan, and both of them understood that, even if neither of them said it out loud. They worked late for a week straight. Takeout containers piled up in the corner of the conference room. Victoria, sleeves rolled to the elbow. Hair falling loose from whatever careful style it had started the day pinned into, stopped looking like a chief executive, and started looking like someone fighting, with everything she had, for something she genuinely loved. Ethan watched her work, and finally understood what Lisa had meant that first night. Victoria never raised her voice, not once, no matter how bad the numbers got. She never blamed anyone for the mistakes that had brought them to this point. She simply found the next problem in the pile and solved it. Then found the one after that, at a pace that would have broken most people within a day or two. She noticed things about him as well. That he never took credit, even when the winning idea in the room was entirely his own. That he had a way of calming a tense meeting simply by staying calm himself, without ever raising his voice or asking anyone else to. That when a supplier tried to pin blame for a missed deadline on a junior staffer, Ethan quietly redirected the blame onto himself instead. The exact same reflex Lisa had described to her years ago, back when Victoria first hired him. By the 4th night, the 2 of them had fallen into an easy rhythm that neither of them commented on. Victoria brought coffee for both of them without being asked. Ethan learned which reports she needed first and had them ready before she asked. Once, when a supplier tried to reach her directly to complain about Ethan's handling of a deadline, she cut the call short before the man could finish his sentence. "He's handling it exactly the way I told him to," she said, and hung up, and didn't mention it to Ethan at all, though he heard about it from someone else the next day and felt something warm settle in his chest that he didn't examine too closely. There was a night, too, when Victoria fell asleep at the conference table without meaning to, her head resting against her folded arms, papers still scattered in front of her. Ethan noticed after a few minutes of silence and didn't wake her right away. He found a spare jacket hanging by the door and draped it carefully over her shoulders instead, then went back to his own work, keeping his voice low on a phone call so it wouldn't disturb her. When she woke nearly an hour later, disoriented and faintly embarrassed, she found half the remaining tasks already finished and a fresh cup of coffee, still warm, waiting by her elbow. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know," Ethan answered, not looking up from his laptop. "I wanted to." She didn't say anything else about it that night, but she remembered it. Weeks later, she would tell him it was the moment she stopped thinking of him only as someone useful to the company and started thinking of him as someone she simply wanted around. One night, close to midnight, the power in the conference room flickered and died completely, a building-wide outage. The security guard explained apologetically over the phone, expected to last at least an hour. Victoria switched on her phone's flashlight and set it on the table between them, and in that small circle of light, something in the room quietly softened. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan said. "You're going to anyway. Why work this hard for a company that treats you like a machine half the time?" Victoria was quiet for a moment, turning the question over. "Because if I stop, even for a week, everyone starts asking whether a woman should have been running this place in the first place. I don't get to be tired in front of them. So I'm tired here instead. Behind a locked door. With you, apparently." It was the most honest thing she had ever said to him. She laughed a little afterward, surprised at her own honesty. And for the first time all week, Ethan saw her laugh without any weight sitting behind it. The lights came back on a few minutes later. Neither of them mentioned the moment again for the rest of that night, but something between them had shifted quietly, permanently, and both of them knew it, even if neither was ready to say so. The email arrived on a Monday morning, sent anonymously to every member of the board within the same 60 seconds. It accused Victoria of favoritism, of pursuing a personal relationship with a direct subordinate, of compromising her professional judgment on a project worth hundreds of millions of dollars because of feelings she should never have allowed anywhere near the office. By 9 o'clock, the board had opened a formal inquiry. By 10, Victoria had removed Ethan from Project Ares. She didn't call him into her office to explain any of it. She didn't send so much as a private message. He found out from an automated notification revoking his access to the project files, and it landed on him like a slap across the face in the middle of an ordinary Monday. What he didn't know was that Victoria had spent that entire morning fighting for him behind closed doors, arguing furiously that pulling him off the project would only punish a man for doing nothing but excellent work under pressure. He didn't know that removing him publicly, coldly, without warning, was the only way she could think to protect him from becoming the center of an investigation that could end both of their careers at once. All Ethan knew, sitting at his desk with his access revoked, was that the one person who had finally seemed to see him clearly had just cut him loose without a single word of explanation. He sat there for a long time that afternoon, staring at a blank document on his screen, and eventually, he arrived at a conclusion that felt heavier than anger. She didn't trust him enough to explain herself. Maybe, in the end, she never really had. He thought about calling Lisa, then decided against it. He thought about walking up to the executive floor and demanding an explanation, then remembered the rumors already circling and decided that would only make things worse for both of them. In the end, he did what he always did when something hurt more than he wanted to admit. He worked quietly, finished the day, and said nothing to anyone. That evening, at his kitchen table, he opened a new document and began typing his resignation letter. He didn't write it in anger. He wrote it the careful, deliberate way he did everything. 3 short paragraphs, thanking the company for 15 years of work, requesting that his last day be as soon as reasonably possible. He read it over once, saved it, and did not send it. Not yet. But the decision had already settled somewhere quiet inside him, the way real decisions usually do, long before his hands ever catch up. Lisa found the unsent letter before Ethan could send it. Because Lisa noticed everything, and because she had never once in 15 years believed that Ethan Carter would quit over a misunderstanding without a fight from her first. "You are not doing this," she said, standing over his desk the next morning with her arms crossed. "Not until I find out what actually happened up there." It took her 3 days. She talked to an assistant on the executive floor who owed her a favor from years back. She checked the metadata buried inside the anonymous email, which had been routed through 2 layers of internal forwarding that weren't quite as clever as whoever built them had assumed. She traced the trail eventually, back to a laptop registered under the name Richard Voss, the vice president who had spent the better part of a year quietly building support on the board to replace Victoria as chief executive. Richard had motive, and plenty of it. The board seat he wanted required Victoria's removal, one way or another. And a scandal, even a fabricated one, was cheaper and faster than winning an honest campaign for the votes he needed. Lisa also found something else while she dug, something that made her sit back in her chair for a long moment before she called Ethan. A former assistant of Richard's, let go quietly 8 months earlier, still bitter about the way it happened, was more than willing to talk once Lisa found her. She confirmed what the metadata already suggested. Richard had been asking for months about ways to access executive correspondence he had no real reason to see. Lisa brought everything to Ethan on a Thursday night, spreading printouts across his kitchen table, like evidence in a case neither of them had ever wanted to build. "If you take this public," she warned him, sliding the last page across the table, "and it doesn't stick the way we think it will, you're finished here. Richard has friends on that board. He'll make sure of it, and there won't be anything I can do to stop him." Ethan looked down at the pages for a long time without speaking. Then he looked up. "She stood up for me without ever telling me," he said quietly, "and I assumed the worst about her the second it got hard. I owe her the truth. Even if it costs me everything I have left here." Lisa studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly, like she'd expected exactly that answer, and had only needed to hear him say it out loud. "Then, we do this properly. Not a rumor, not a leak to someone in accounting who'll twist it into something smaller than it is. We take it straight to the board, with everything laid out so clean nobody can argue with it. You make it sound simple. It isn't. But it's the only version of this that doesn't get you fired anyway." He didn't sleep that night. He spent it, instead, building a full timeline: email headers, login records, a financial transaction Richard had made 2 days before quietly selling off part of his own company shares, timed suspiciously close to the sudden dip in stock price that followed the anonymous accusation. By morning, Ethan had built something the board would not be able to wave away or explain as coincidence. He requested a seat at the next board meeting. It was granted, reluctantly, for the following Monday morning, at 9 o'clock sharp. The boardroom that Monday felt colder than usual, the long table gleaming under overhead lights that seemed harsher than they had any right to be. Richard stood first, calm and clearly rehearsed, laying out his case against Victoria with the practiced ease of a man who had been building toward this single morning for months. He spoke of poor judgment, of a leader distracted by personal feelings at the worst possible moment, of a company that deserved a chief executive who kept her private life and her calendar strictly separated from the people who reported to her. Victoria sat perfectly still through all of it, jaw set, giving nothing away to the room. But for the first time in years, to the handful of people who knew her well enough to see it, she looked like someone who might actually lose. Then it was Ethan's turn. He stood, set a folder on the table in front of him, and did not raise his voice once through the entire presentation. He walked the board through the anonymous email, line by line, and the forwarding trail hidden behind it. He showed them the financial filings. Richard's stock sale timed 2 days before the scandal broke, structured in a way that would only profit from exactly the kind of chaos he had personally engineered. He brought forward a junior staffer from the IT department, nervous but certain of every word, who confirmed the login records under careful questioning from the chairman. Richard tried to interrupt twice. Both times, the chairman told him, flatly, to sit back down and let the man finish. At one point, Richard turned toward the rest of the board, forcing a laugh that didn't land. "This is absurd. You're going to take the word of a mid-level project manager over a sitting vice president?" "I'm going to take the word of the evidence," the chairman said, "which so far has your name on it in 3 separate places, Richard." The room went quieter after that. By the time Ethan closed the folder, the room had gone very quiet. The particular kind of quiet that settles over a group of people the moment they realize they've been played, and by whom exactly they'd been played. The vote didn't take long after that. Richard was removed from the board that same afternoon, his resignation demanded before he had even left the building's parking garage. Victoria retained her position, unanimously, with a formal apology from 3 board members who had doubted her only days earlier, and now seemed determined not to meet her eyes. As the room slowly emptied, Victoria caught Ethan's arm before he could follow the others out the door. "Stay," she said quietly. "Please." They sat alone in the boardroom long after everyone else had gone. The late afternoon light, slanting low through the windows. The entire building around them, finally, mercifully quiet. "I should have told you why I pulled you off the project," Victoria said, turning her chair to face him fully. "I was trying to protect you. I did it badly, and I let you believe something about me that wasn't true. You could have just said that at the time. I've spent 10 years making absolutely sure no one at this company ever saw me need anyone else." She looked down at her hands, folded on the table. "I didn't know how to say it out loud without it sounding like weakness to a room full of people already looking for one." Ethan pulled his chair closer, the same distance he'd sat from her at that restaurant weeks ago. Except nothing about this particular moment felt like an accident anymore. "You're not weak for letting someone see it," he said. "And I'm not weak for caring what happens to you. Neither of those things ever made either of us worse at our jobs." Victoria looked at him for a long moment, something unguarded crossing her face that he hadn't seen there before. "You stood in front of that entire board and put your career on the line for me. Do you understand how rarely people do that? Most people in that building would have let me lose just to keep their own name clean. I'm not most people." "No," she said quietly. "You're really not." Victoria was quiet for another long moment, weighing something. Then, carefully, "The way someone tests a bridge they're not entirely sure will hold their weight," she said. "There's a director position opening at our West Coast subsidiary, strategy division. You'd report to their board out there, not to me. No conflict of interest left standing. No rumor left anywhere for anyone to make stick. You've already thought this whole thing through." "I've had a very bad week," she said. "I needed something to plan that wasn't a lawsuit." He almost laughed at that. "So, this is you asking me out. Properly, this time, with paperwork attached. This is me removing every excuse either of us has left to keep avoiding it." Lisa, who had been hovering near the door for the last several minutes, pretending to reorganize files that did not remotely need reorganizing, finally let herself all the way in. She looked between the two of them, took in the whole scene at once, and started laughing before either of them could offer a single word of explanation. "I set up one blind date," she said, shaking her head slowly. "One. And somehow I ended up rescuing my own sister's entire career in the process." "Technically," Ethan said, "she's the one who rescued mine." "Don't get used to it," Victoria said, though she was smiling now, the kind of smile that had never once made an appearance inside that particular building before this year. As Lisa headed back out, still laughing to herself, Victoria reached for her coat draped over the back of her chair. "Dinner," she said. "Same restaurant as before. Another blind date?" "No," she said, holding the door open for him. "This time I'll already know exactly who's sitting across from me before I even sit down." A month passed, and Ethan Carter became director of strategy for a company that answered to an entirely different board, in a different building across town, with no one left to whisper about where his loyalties belonged. He earned the title the same quiet way he'd earned everything else in his career, without asking anyone to notice, letting the work speak for itself the way it always eventually did. His new office was smaller than he expected, with a window that looked out over a parking lot instead of a skyline, and he found, to his own surprise, that he didn't miss the view at all. Lisa visited once during his first week, glancing around at the bare walls and half-unpacked boxes, and told him it suited him better than the glass tower ever had. He thought she was probably right. Victoria no longer signed his paychecks. She no longer sat across from him during performance reviews with a closed door and a raised eyebrow. What she did instead, most Friday evenings, was meet him at the same restaurant where all of this had first started, at the same table by the window, as if some quiet part of both of them needed to keep returning to the exact place where a mistake had first turned into something else entirely. On one of those evenings, she arrived before him and was already seated when he walked through the door. A small, deliberate echo of the night. Neither of them would ever completely stop laughing about. "The first time I sat here," she said as he took his seat across from her, "I was furious. I genuinely thought my sister had lost her mind. And now? Now I sit here because I want to see you. Which is, I'll admit, a very different reason to show up early." Ethan smiled and reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a small folded card. the kind a hostess used to mark reservations, the exact same kind that had been sitting on this table the night the two of them first collided by accident. He set it down gently between them. Victoria looked at the name written across it and went completely still for a moment. Then she laughed, the real laugh, the one that used to be rare in that building and simply wasn't rare anymore. It didn't say blind date. It said first official date. "You're a little late," she said, tapping the card. "That was 2 months ago. I like to take my time," Ethan said. "You'd know something about that yourself." Outside, the city had settled into that particular hour when the streetlights come on before the sky has fully admitted the day is over, and the restaurant windows glowed warm against the early evening. A waiter refilled 2 glasses neither of them had touched yet, and neither of them noticed, too caught up in a conversation that no longer needed careful boundaries or a company policy manual to survive. They finished dinner slowly, the way people do once they've stopped counting the minutes left in an evening. Victoria told him, for the first time, about her father. About the year everything changed at once, and she stopped letting anyone close enough to see it happen. Ethan told her, quietly, about the years after his divorce. About learning to be alone so well that he'd almost forgotten how to be anything else. Neither story needed fixing. Both of them simply needed to be heard by someone who wasn't going anywhere. At one point, Victoria reached across the table and turned his hand over in hers, studying it as though it were something worth examining closely. "I used to think I had to choose," she said, "between running that company well and letting anyone actually know me. I don't think that's true anymore." "It was never true," Ethan said. "You just didn't have anyone worth testing it on before." "Careful," she said, smiling. "That's dangerously close to a compliment. I've been known to give one occasionally. Ask around." She laughed, and the sound of it filled the small space between them the way it never had in any boardroom. When they finally stepped outside, the street was quiet, the air cool against the last of the evening light, and Victoria slipped her hand into his without either of them making any kind of announcement about it. It simply happened, the way the truest things usually do. It hadn't started as a love story. It had started as a scheduling mistake, a mix-up between 2 sisters who didn't share a last name, a blind date that walked straight into a boardroom rivalry neither of them had ever seen coming. But somewhere between an anonymous email and an empty conference room lit only by a phone flashlight, somewhere between a boardroom vote and the quiet apology that followed it, it had become one anyway, without either of them ever quite deciding to let it. They walked down the street together, past the restaurant lights fading slowly behind them, into whatever came next. No longer a chief executive and a project manager, no longer a rumor waiting to happen 2 floors apart, just 2 people who had somehow found each other twice, once by accident, standing frozen at a table neither of them had chosen, and once entirely on purpose, holding a small white card that finally said exactly what it meant.